When talking about culture, as I had previously mentioned, we are going to distinguish between non-material culture and material culture. The main component of non-material culture are symbols. So this is anything to which people attach meaning to, and then they use those symbols to communicate with other individuals. These symbols are arbitrary. What I mean by this is that there is no inherent connection. There's just social agreement. So symbols of non-material culture have simply had these meaning attached to them, and they have been used over time and passed on from generations to generations, in which socially societies have agreed upon what these meant. So there are a few different types of non-material culture. We're going to talk about these symbols, and they include gestures, language, values, norms, sanctions, folkways and mores, and taboos. So we will begin with gestures. Gestures are simple movements of the body that we as individuals use to communicate with others. Without gestures, we would have to speak out loud all the time in order to get our point across. But rather, we have simple movements of our hands that we can communicate with others very quickly. What's important to understand is that gestures vary from culture to culture. So, for example, if you are sitting in a restaurant and you are being served by a waiter or waitress, and you begin to eat, and the waiter or waitress will look over at you and kind of give you a head nod to ask how your meal is. You might want to go ahead and give an A-OK sign, and that would mean A-OK to anyone that is watching. However, if you are in Brazil and you are traveling and you are eating your food and the waiter or waitress gives you a nod, to indicate, how's your meal? And you gave the A-OK sign, this is not okay. This is basically telling someone a curse word. So these gestures vary from culture to culture. Second, we have language. Language is a system of symbols that uses words to communicate a conceptual thought. So, language is really just sound patterns that have standardized meanings attached to each sound that is made. We, as humans, speak language, but we all know that, again, language does also vary from culture to culture, just as gestures do. Then we have values. Values are general convictions about what is good or bad, what is right or wrong, what is desirable or not. They are shared, abstract ideas by people in a culture of what we believe in and how we think that we should live. So, when you talk about the United States, we live in what is referred to as a pluralistic community. So we have many diverse groups from different cultural backgrounds, so people coming from all areas of the world. However, we have core United States values, and they include the following: success, individualism, hard work, practicality, technology, material comfort, freedom, education, democracy, and equality. These are our core United States values, according to sociologist Williams. So even though we all may have different backgrounds, we're of different races and different ethnicities, in general, living in the United States, we are socialized to more or less believe in these values as individuals. We also have value clusters. These are a set of values that tend to form a whole, so they kind of more or less hang together. There are a variety of value clusters, but one of the most recent value clusters that we're seeing emerging in the United States is that of leisure, self-fulfillment, physical fitness, youthfulness, and the environment. So this is a value cluster. They all more or less hang together. They form a whole. Oftentimes, there can be value contradictions within a value cluster. So these are disagreement between values within one cluster of values. As we were just speaking about the United States, there are times whereby there are values that disagree with one another. For example, group superiority and equality. So here in the United States, we believe in getting ahead, moving up the social ladder, which would equate to group superiority. But then another value that we have in the United States is that of equality. These contradict one another. You cannot have group superiority and simultaneously have equality as well. So it's important to realize that although we have these cluster of values, there can often be contradictions within these clusters. Next, we have norms. Norms are a part of non-material culture. Norms are agreed upon expectations and rules of how people are supposed to act, think, and feel in specific situations. We learn about these norms or about these rules through social interaction. So from our peers, from our parents, from our teachers, they teach us what is expected of us within our society, within our culture. So this is learned through social interaction. Groups use something known as sanctions. Sanctions are stipulations for either following or breaking a norm in one's culture. So often, if you break a norm or you follow a norm, you will have a sanction. It can be a positive sanction or a negative sanction, and it can be a formal sanction or an informal sanction. So for example, you do well on an exam. A positive informal sanction would be a high five. In contrast, you might do well at your job and get a cash bonus. This would be a positive formal sanction. Then we have negative sanctions. So, for example, you might really mess up at your job and you get fired. This would be a formal negative sanction. Or perhaps you don't do something that your parents had asked you to do, and so you will receive harsh words. Again, a negative sanction. From time to time, there is something that is referred to as a moral holiday. This is a specified time that people are actually permitted to break their cultural norms. The best example that we use in Introduction to Sociology is that of Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras is a time of year in New Orleans where the norms are basically thrown out the door. There's public intoxication, there's public urination, there's rowdiness going on that otherwise would be deemed as breaking norms in our society. We have folkways. Folkways are a type of norm, and it's the customary way of doing things. So for example, if you break a folkway, there is no severe sanction. So a great example of breaking a folkway would be picking your nose in public. In the United States, in our culture, we simply know from a young age that we're not supposed to pick our nose in public. When you break this would be breaking a folkway. Another example of a folkway would be that in the United States, we eat sandwiches for lunch, cold-cut sandwiches. This is something that is just a customary way of doing things in the United States. Following folkways, another type of norm, but a much more serious norm, is a more serious norm. So a more is a strong norm, and it has severe consequences for when they are broken. So it really demands conformity. Laws often set a more in motion. So they set the criteria. So we know that if you break a more, you'll have a serious sanction. Good example of this would be murder. We know that in the United States, we do not murder other individuals. And if you break this more, you can, in fact, get a severe punishment through our criminal justice system. Then, even beyond mores, are taboos. Taboos are so strongly infused into our brain as a norm that when it's violated, it is seen with repulsion. It is repulsive. So a more is that we should not commit murder. A taboo would be you should not eat that dead body. So this is something like cannibalism. If an individual in our culture engages in cannibalism, it is seen with repulsion. So that just about wraps up our non-material culture.